Okay, great.
The green light comes on.
Good morning. Good morning, folks in the Great Hall. Good morning to folks who are joining us online. It's good to be gathered with Calvary folk this morning. Oh, thanks. That's right. Hearing myself in double time. At this last Sunday of the Epiphany, as we begin to make the turn toward Lent, one of the things that we're going to be doing today is kind of a twofold conversation. The first part is looking at who's coming, celebrating this 100th year of the preaching series and giving you all some teasers about these good folks and why you might want to make an extra effort to be present. Although I'm looking around the room thinking that most of y'all don't need an extra oomph to be here, and we'll share a little bit about the folks that we're looking forward to. And the other piece of the conversation is that the theme of this year, as much as it's a historical, like a moment in Calvary history, right? If we've been doing this for 100 years, and there's a lovely article in the Chronicle that tracks the timeline of the preaching series and all of that kind of retrospective feel. The theme of the year is the future of faith. And some of our preachers will address that directly, some of them will not. That's their prerogative. But we wanted to make sure that as much as we were celebrating the past, that we were not just wallowing back there, that we were looking forward in hope and expectation and with joy and all the things toward the role of the church and faithfulness in the future. So we're going to have a little conversation about that too. But the first thing I want to do is just let y'all know who's coming. I'm going to sit underneath this, which is a little weird, but so you can see. Yeah, sorry. So this first week is John Meacham here on Ash Wednesday. This will be the only day that maybe feels a little different. We haven't usually had a guest preacher on Ash Wednesday. Usually that's been kind of still an in-house day. But he requested to be the preacher on that day. So we'll have Eucharist and Ashes as well as guest preacher at the noon service. You're welcome to come join us at 7:30 in the morning or 7 p.m. if you're looking for that in-house feel. But we're expecting a big crowd because obviously John Meacham is pretty much a rock star. So we're looking forward to that. And then the others this week are Dan Matthews, another rock star, certainly someone who can hold the story of the history of this. Last year we were able to celebrate his participation in a 50-year span of the preaching series, and he's here for the second half of the century, I guess. He's just getting started for round 2. And then Friday is Becca Stevens, and she'll also have folks from Thistle Farms with her from Nashville. Anybody you want to talk about this week? Any notes or?
I mean, they're all great, yeah. John Meacham didn't just call us and say, but Mimsy Jones got us a little circuitous way around to him, and I kind of love that he wants to preach at a liturgy. He is an Episcopalian, and so I'm very curious as to what he'll have to say, because that's a different day to choose. The preacher doesn't make Ash Wednesday. There's a lot important going on. So, and John would know that. So it makes me want to hear him all the more that he was drawn to that day.
Right. And then week 2 is Jennifer Bailey, Omid Safi, and Micah Greenstein. And this interfaith and ecumenical community is going to be a great, strong week. And all 3 of them are going to be in conversation together on Wednesday night when we do our first of the series podcast recording. Anyone want to comment on?
Well, of course, Micah typically draws one of our largest crowds each year, but more than that, I've got to know him as a real pastoral presence. He and I have done funerals together for people who have family members who are both part of Temple Israel as well as Calvary, and it's just amazing to see him in that setting as well. And he brings that presence also among our clergy team. He's sort of an unofficial dean, you could say, of the clergy around Memphis, especially when crises come about. And he is such a pastoral presence as well as a presence who's willing to challenge authority and challenge as needed. He brings that dimension of understanding not only faith in such a profound way, but he has a degree from the Kennedy School of Government in Harvard, and he understands faith's relationship with society, with civic institutions, and he brings that to our city. And so we always look forward to Micah being here.
Right. And Jen Bailey is coming to us from Nashville. She's a Christian writer and a kind of an up-and-coming voice and thinker in the larger community. And one of the folks that I'm most excited to hear is Omid Safi. He's come to Calvary before, but not since I've been here. And I just hear fantastic things about folks and his voice and presence as a Muslim scholar.
I mean, so one little brand placement. I got to do the Bishop's radio show last week, and it drops next week. So if you want to hear Micah in advance, Micah and Roz Nichols and I were in conversation on Thursday morning on WYXR. But Omid, when he was here last, the Friday that he was preaching, it was the Friday when a shooter entered a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, and killed people. That happened within the hour when we were getting, or the news of it traveled. And so Omid stood up in the pulpit as the representative of the Muslim community who'd written the book that he had just published was a collection of writings on love. It's beautiful. He stepped into the pulpit and he said, I know what the last thing the person that greeted the killer at the door said. Peace be upon you. Because that's what we say when people come to the mosque. And it was one of the most powerful moments and a reminder how in 100 years history, when you have this diverse collection of folks, like history is going to intersect in real time occasionally in really powerful ways.
Absolutely. You want to move us forward? Thanks, Robin. Okay, week 3 is Brian McLaren, Winnie Varghese, and Dahlia Mogahead. Again, I mean, I'm going to say this every time. What a great week! Like this is just going to be great. I'm really excited about it. Several folks, we had a couple dozen Calvaryites who were part of a book study of Brian McLaren's most recent book, Why Stay Christian, or Do I Stay Christian? Last fall, we had really, really thoughtful conversations. That book, if you're interested, is a great read, and the answers are, in part, do I stay Christian? No. Do I stay Christian? Yes. And he kind of lays out the arguments for either. And then the last third of the book is how. Whichever track you've chosen, how do you live with integrity in that space? And he does a deep dive of some of the darker chapters of Christian history, which are some of the rationale for saying no. And then also looks at the beauty and the offerings and the faithfulness of the church in the yes chapters. Anyway, it's really, really thoughtful. He's been here before. He's a prolific writer, and also just a kind person. I reached out to him a few weeks ago because he'll be in conversation with Winnie on the Wednesday night podcast. We'll come back to those podcasts. And I reached out to both of them to set up our conversation and just to, make some introductions and that kind of thing. And it was I think it was in the early days of kind of Memphis still in the throes and reeling from the Tyree Nichols video release. It was later in January. And he wrote back with this incredibly pastoral response, acknowledging he knew what was going on in Memphis. He knew where we were, and he just responded with kindness as well as logistical details. So it's really great. Winnie is in Atlanta, and Dahlia is coming to us from geography lesson.
I don't remember where she lives.
Where she's
Washington,
Thank
Washington,
you.
D.C.,
Yeah.
Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding.
right. So just a really, really strong, both intellectually challenging but deeply faithful people who bring those into conversation. Week 4, Father Greg Boyle, Mary Ann Borg, and Padre Gotuma will be here. What a great week. Father Greg Boyle will be here, and I don't know if he's bringing some of the folks who are much like Thistle Farms folks are coming with Becca. I think there may be a larger community that Greg Boyle works with in LA, his homies, his homeboy industries. He'll also have another event with a local partner, Just City, and the Roman Catholic Church, I think St. Peter's may be hosting that, or
St.
Michael.
Patrick's.
Thank you, thanks. And then Mary Ann Borg is a preacher in her own right. So let's not start with she was married to Marcus Borg, although she certainly was, and they had a long, beautiful marriage and relationship. But she's a beautiful preacher and a gift, and we're honored to have her come as kind of the standard bearer, because this is a retrospective of remembering some of the great voices that we've heard, and also looking forward. And then Padre Gotuma, poet, preacher, teacher. If you know his Poetry Unbound podcast, you know it's great. If you don't know it, go find the podcast. And he'll be leading, in addition to preaching on Friday, be leading a retreat on Saturday, the 18th at St. Columba on prayer, practices, and poetry. And then he'll still be with us on Sunday.
Another cool thing in the way the intersections, like one of the things that we know that this year we want to have a few Memphians, but we'll probably have more folks from out of town to have a more global view this year, and balancing so that we could have conversations among folks like a Boyle and Borg and Otuma. Although I can't remember if Mary Ann's going to be there that night. But anyway, when I reached out to Padraig to say, what do you think about being here when Father Greg Boyle is here? Would you be willing to share the Wednesday? Because we'd gotten information from Padraig first, and he's like, that would be amazing. I just got an email from him a week ago where he had just read my first book and was moved by it, and I got to know his work and was moved by it. And they both have work in peacemaking and reconciliation. Padraig in Ireland, and then Father Greg in LA. So it was just cool, to say, we had a really neat group of folks help us imagine who might be important to ask, and then it really takes on energy when we hear the people say, oh, well, I already know who you're talking about, and I can't wait to sit on your stage and have a conversation with him.
One of the things that seems to be so true is that preaching can be a little bit of a solitary exercise. You're the only one in the pulpit, right? You might work with folks, and you might bounce ideas off, and you're certainly in dialogue with, history and scripture and friends and family. But then you get up there and you kind of do it on your own a little bit. And so many of the folks have been really thrilled with the Wednesday night conversations because they're going to be able to talk to each other and to talk with each other. And we've had people request, I think this is true, the next week, please pair me with this person because I really want to talk to them. And the energy that they have for being brought to Calvary at the same time to be with each other has been really, really exciting. So with that, yes, I am right. So the next week is Barbara Brown Taylor, Episcopal Church fame and delight, and the great preacher, Rabbi David Wolpe, and then our own Memphian Roz Nichols. Barbara Brown Taylor said, I want to come the week that Rabbi Wolpe is here. I want to be in conversation with him. That they were seeking each other out to get to know each other better and to spend this time in conversation. So,
I'm like a kid in a candy store. I get to moderate the conversation between those two, and I can't wait. Barbara Brown Taylor, as you all know, her honesty in her storytelling is just phenomenal. She's just such an amazing storyteller, but there's so much more about her. I remember reading her book, Leaving Church, and she took a little flack for that because she was stepping out of the pulpit and going into the academia world, and she actually on the cover of the book had a cage, and a dove is flying out of the cage. And I remember at seminary, she preached to us, and a student asked afterward, asking, was that dove a symbol for you, leaving the pulpit? She said, do I look like a beautiful white little bird? She said, what does the dove symbolize in the church? And we all said, oh, the Holy Spirit. She said, yeah, what I was trying to get to is not just my own story, but how the Holy Spirit is released from the church into the world. And she's just amazing in those connections that she makes. And she was the one who suggested Rabbi Wolpe to us. And to give you, I had the privilege of leading a group over the last 6 weeks on his book, Making Loss Matter, Creating Meaning in Difficult Times. And he deals very candidly and honestly with his wife's diagnosis with cancer that was happening around the same time that he wrote the book. And he not only talks about loss in terms of death, but he talks about loss of self, loss of love, loss of faith, how we all experience various losses at different stages in our life. And what we really came to terms with at the end of the 6 weeks was that we can put so much on ourselves of creating meaning, I've got to find meaning from whatever loss there is in my life. And where he came to was we really find meaning or create meaning in community, in little groups like that met on Wednesday night, in our families, in our church, and in our sphere. And it was just really powerful how he brought us to that. So I can't wait for his preaching time with us and his conversation with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last week, Caitlin Curtis, Jamar Tisby, and Sam Title. Sam is local, Jamar is almost local, and Caitlin Curtis is a new voice for us as well. So we're going to finish out with a lot of young, again, some younger up-and-coming voices. As much as we're celebrating the 100-year history, this turning and looking ahead, looking a little bit down the road, what do we see on the horizon? So these are going to be 3 great voices for that conversation as well.
Yeah, and Caitlin Curtis has Native American roots. She's a practicing Christian, but very much brings her Native American spirituality. She also has, I'm pretty sure, evangelical roots. I don't think she described herself that way, but that was formed in the evangelical church. Jamar would still describe himself as an evangelical, black evangelical Christian in the Reformed tradition. So I think it's important we hear, too, that there's some ecumenical diversity and some theological diversity, and people are going to approach the scriptures in different ways and yet find some real resonance, I think, across all of these differences. Jamar's this will be the 3rd time Jamar's here, and Caitlin was supposed to come when we shut down for COVID, and I believe Heidi had a podcast episode. We were just learning the ropes on the podcast thing whenever COVID hit, and so we went ahead and followed through, and so look that up. It was really, really interesting to hear a bit of her story there if you want to tease her.
So this is the lineup, and as you can see, do you want to add?
Oh, no, we had a wonderful study, too, of Jamar's Color of Compromise a few years ago, just right before COVID, and Wednesday night discussions. He joined us for our last class, just such a gracious person. And he also wrote a book, How to Fight Racism, which is probably one of those practical guides to really a lot of the steps that those of you who are participating in Sacred Ground groups and other groups around racial healing. It really is a step-by-step way of really engaging ourselves in racial healing. And I told him I thought it was almost like a Benedictine manual, on how to really do this and practice that. So I commend to you both of his books.
And they're specifically for the church.
Absolutely.
They're specifically for the church. Right.
So this extraordinary lineup to celebrate this year is just amazing. Each person, so they're in order, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, each week, 12:05, you know that. Some other pieces, we've referenced the podcast conversations, so on Wednesday nights, 2 or 3 folks from each week, from that week, will be present together in conversation, and one of us will get the privilege of facilitating those conversations, which we're all really excited about. You can come on Wednesday nights. It's a simple supper. It's soup like the soup folks from Soup Sundays. We'll be serving on Wednesday evening, so a simple meal. Then the conversation will be here in the Great Hall, and it'll be a dialogue, thus the name, dialogue, and between the guests, but we'll, at some point, we'll open it up so that there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions and join in that conversation and be a part of that as well. So that's going to be a great offering on Wednesday nights. We won't start on Ash Wednesday because we still got church to do, but the first full week, then the following week, that'll be every Wednesday night. The other piece of the schedule that's kind of less flashy, but maybe a little more Lenten, is that on Tuesdays, we're going to open the church for the same block of time, that 12:05 to 12:30, 12:35 moment, and be together in silence. So it's kind of like the flip script of everything else. It's a much smaller crowd, I can guarantee you. And we'll ring a bell, we'll offer one piece of reflective reading, and then we'll sit. And if you haven't had the opportunity to sit together in quiet in this space, I invite you to that. If you haven't had the opportunity to sit together in silence in a small community, I think Mimsy Jones might know something about the power of silence in community, and several other folks who are part of that St. Clair community. It could be a really special time. Again, it doesn't have maybe the flash and draw of the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday lineup, but if you're looking for some place to be, to breathe, to slow down, to pause, we'll be here Tuesdays offering that. So those are the other two pieces of the schedule. And the last thing that I'm going to say before we kind of shift gears is that these bright pink pieces of paper that are floating around have a QR code and Heidi Rupke's email address. Waffle Shop and especially Lenten Preaching Series hosting does not happen without people at the doors saying, this is how to get from the parking lot to the church. We're so glad you're here. Let me show you the way. Oh, do you need to know where the restroom is? I can take you there. Here's the bulletin. We're so glad you're here. So little hospitality goes a long way, especially in our convoluted little building here. And we need you. You can do it one time. You can do it every Thursday. You can do it every day. We need folks to come and be the face of Calvary as Memphis gathers here, because Memphis is coming. And we need to staff the doors, right? So if you're at all able to participate and to give a little bit of time on one of those days, we'd really appreciate you. And there's a QR code and an email address, and you can get more information, or you can just go to the Calvary website. So as we shift gears, I want to take a moment, though, to say, when you hear this name and list of folks, are there folks that you're excited about hearing from? Anybody want to share a little bit of, like, I can't wait for, or... All of the above, right? It's going to be great. Good answer, Madge. Yeah, I know that, yeah.
All of the above, but Meacham, I think.
Yeah.
It was, I'm not going to say when I saw his name I was surprised, but I went, God, how'd that happen? And I just think it's exciting to have him.
Yeah.
My book club has read a couple of his things and his thoughtfulness. And, anyway.
If you knew what his standard speaking fee was, you'd really be surprised. So. Which he was very generous. I mean, I'm saying that only because he chose to be with us on Ash Wednesday and is very gracious and all that.
Having done Calvary finance in the past, I've been shocked. But I'm excited he's here and that we've said yes.
Yeah. There's a lot of generosity of spirit and a lot of generosity of support, and so it's going to be a great, great year. So as we said, one of the things that we have offered to our guests, we want you to choose a word from Scripture, whatever holy text that might be for them. That's their choice. And we have said, here's a kind of a gentle nudge in the direction of looking forward, of looking toward the future of faith. Now, that said, you can say those things to a preacher, and they'll talk about whatever they want to talk about. Which is part of the joy and the excitement of this season. But we are trying to look up, look ahead, look forward. And I think particularly in this moment where there tends to be a lot of, if you ask people the future of faith, you tend to kind of get a doom and gloom answer, like, oh, shrinking numbers, oh, this, oh, like there's some pessimism out there. And so I wanted to kind of offer another way of framing the question that's not about, mainline church decline since the 1950s or whatever, but where we see new growth in new ways, new opportunities. And so I'd love just to open that conversation up with the three of us, but if y'all want to get started with a premise or a thought or...
Well, I'll share that I mentioned the Sacred Ground group a moment ago, and Scott and he's part of the Wednesday night group, I'm part of the Sunday afternoon group, and several of you are participating in that. And these are conversations really for white people to have. It doesn't have to be exclusively white people, but really to understand racial history and not just relations with the black community. We've gotten deep into Native American, our relationship there, what happened with schools, many schools that were sponsored or by Episcopal churches that were trying to really take away the culture, strip the culture from Native Americans. It's just been really heartbreaking to see some of the history, but it's been something that we've needed to see, and it's really been profound. And what's been probably most profound about that is the aha moments we've had together as a community. That we've had those shared ahas, of things that we did not see, and we're beginning to see in a different way. And it's been a really transformative thing. And we use that word transformation. We throw it around a lot in the church, but to see it, experience it actually happening. And this course is deliberately meant to be a slow thing where we meet every 2 weeks, we have time to reflect, and it started in the fall and it's continuing through the spring. And it's just been a phenomenal journey. And I would say that's one place, at least within the institutional church, that I'm seeing something new.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's been important to me to be a part of that group. And it's also a reminder, I'll just say it, I'm tired of mainline Christians wringing their hands about the decline of the church. And I don't know anybody who's like, I'm really going to go to that church because, boy, they're really worried. They're a little more worried. Now, I don't think the source of our whatever's to come, whatever God has for it, is because we were sufficiently anxious and worried and, to flip that around, I think that there's a concept just in organization called appreciative inquiry, which basically says an organization tends to go obsess over what's going wrong or what might be wrong or when if they're going to address what's wrong, they're going to be attending to what they're brilliant at, like your particular genius, your particular gifts. And the squeaky wheel cliche is one way of talking about that. We spend all our time on the squeaky wheels and forget all the wheels that are carrying us around. So I think Sacred Ground is one of those substantive, relative, important kinds of work that a community can do that the world needs right now. And I'll preach some on this also this morning about the world's a lonely place. And when I look around and frame it not in terms of I wonder what this institution's going to do over the next decades and what how that ship could be righted, I don't know how to answer that. I don't know. But I know a lot of people in Memphis who are lonely and disconnected and trying to find a community of people, trying to find a handful of people to talk about things that matter to them, like who am I? Does God love me? Am I accepted like I am, or is there some other way of assessing who I am? So when I think of the future of faith in those terms, instead of just show me the graphs and demographically, when will the last Episcopalian come to church, and then she'll walk out and we'll close the doors and then we'll all be, you know what, no. It's much more life-giving to think about, given where we are, given our world, what do we have to offer and what feeds your soul? Why are you here? I think those will be the sources of whatever the future holds.
Right. Yep, Mimsy. Yeah.
I wanted to tell you all that about 3 weeks ago, there is a group that Marianne Moore called the Marcus J. Moore Foundation. And she is the director of it. And as I say, 3 weeks ago, I got a notice, really, from somebody who I didn't knew about this. And it announced that there would be what she calls second Saturday. Every second Saturday of the month, she engages conversation with different people. Her guest 3 weeks ago was Barbara Brown Taylor. And so, of course, I was jumping all over that. And the whole discussion was it wasn't so much it was just the future of Christianity, the future of church. And both of them were like, it was like Scott read their minds, because it was like, get over this. The Spirit is in the world. It's what Paul was talking about too. And I would love to hear the two of them. Maybe we will get to hear more from each one of them. I hope they're piqued interest for the topic of the future of faith. Of course, my question is, what is faith? But that's for another time.
That's an excellent question.
I think we left it undefined for them, so that could be potential the preacher could explore. Is it a faith tradition? Is it a frame of personal? Is it the church? Right. Is it? Yeah,
well, and there's some lovely, and again, this kind of like less, kind of pessimism and more reimagining, being open to it will look different, whatever it is, the church, faith, all these things, it already does look different, it already is different. But what is the peculiar and particular gift of gathering people for sacraments, for conversations about things that matter, for looking at things that are hard? We're actually particularly prepared to do that as Christians. Our Christian story is a story of death and resurrection, right? So we are primed and capable and prepared to acknowledge loss and hurt, and to not wallow and stay there, right? Like to be real and truthful about that, and then to prepare ourselves for, we don't know what the resurrection is going to look like. They didn't know what it was going to look like. They kept looking around saying, is this it? Who is this person? And so we might not recognize it immediately, but new expressions, new ways of being, but built on what we are particularly capable of and practiced in, which is gathering together in person. There are lots of advantages to virtual gatherings and Zoom and all that kind of stuff, but I can't put bread in your hand unless we're together, right? We can't put oil on your head and say prayers together unless we're physically in the same space. So what gifts we have as Episcopalians, as sacramental people, as faithful people, as people who we're going to offer food to the hungry, but we're not the same as MIFA, right? We're different. Our purposes, our gatherings, and our meanings are different and peculiar in really wonderful ways.
Yeah, I was thinking too that Scott has a wonderful sermon that many of you are about to hear about that relates to technology, and he does address obviously loneliness, which he talked about. But another thing I think that technology has caused us to do is have shorter time horizons. We can all reach to our smartphone or whatever device and get a quick answer or a quick response, and we feel some energy just from getting a text message or something. Somebody loves me, whatever. We get a feel for that. But I think one thing that the church, people of faith, can do, if beyond the church, is we can look longer term. And as Catherine was saying, we are a different community. God has gathered us together, and we're gathered. We weekly experience sacramental, and we keep coming back week after week. And we have, I think, a longer-term time horizon. I think God has that too, and that's a part of who we are. And many of the things that we're facing are structural, long-term structural things, like you can talk about crime in Memphis, but then you get into literacy, third-grade reading levels. You get into our criminal justice system. You get into all sorts of issues that are not easy fixes, that you just can't flash a button and fix. It's where I draw inspiration too is from a lot of folks like you who are meeting one-to-one with someone on adult literacy to offer tutoring. Finding those kind of relationships that are not, may not make the news and may not be a quick hit and may take time to develop. I think that's where faith in the future, I think if we can give that long time horizon to a lot of the things that in our world that need it, I think that will be profound.
Yeah, that's helpful. Well, last night, I got a text from Betty Jo Dulaney, who's going to say something in church today, but this was just Betty Jo sending an article in The Atlantic that had just dropped about the school where their son Will is in boarding school in Rhode Island, I think, and at Trinity. And so Will has been in boarding school, And the article is, she sent me this note because she had sent me a book about a journalist who had spoken there that really inspired Will about the power of faith communities, because he was writing about Squirrel Hill when the tragedy happened in a synagogue in in a synagogue in Pittsburgh years back. There was a shooting, and then it's the whole story this journalist told about these faith communities coming together and the healing. And so it really impressed her son. Backstory: the guy who wrote that book just wrote an article in The Atlantic about going to St. Andrews to speak in chapel. And he went to the headmaster and the head of school and said, something's different. Like, I went to lunch and kids are talking and there are conversations, and I can't put my finger on it. He said, there's no cell phones. And so the school had a policy where kids can't have a cell phone until the evening, and they put them in these pockets and whatnot. These are high schoolers. They relaxed it during the pandemic, and it took a while to decide whether they were going to bring it back because, kids, everybody's cut off, and they needed the phones to do. They thought they did, and it was the senior class, a couple of people in the senior class who said, "We got to bring the phone ban back." And the reason I say that, the reason in this context of this is I think one of the things we know about ourselves that technology has exposed is we don't know what we want. We know on that short-term horizon what I think will get me the next dopamine hit because I got a thumb. There's a whole lot of psychology around that. But William Carlos Williams years ago said, you won't get the news from poetry, but men die miserably every day for lack of what's found there. I think there's something in church that isn't for everybody, but I think there's still a capacity for realization, like those high schoolers who say, I think there's some different way of being in the world, and there might be a community who could support that in some way. So attending to who we are truthfully by really and openly and looking to how God might be changing us by the world that's changing, it seems both of those things seem really important. And who knows, these quirky old analog in-person practices that we've been doing forever can really, if you're in the room, they can heal in the deepest places when you've needed them to. So that's another way of thinking about the future of faith that's connected to that and all the things.
So I wonder what y'all see. Where do you see hopefulness? I use the word beauty, or what questions do you have? What do you wonder about? Maybe we need to address some of the worries, but also what does this conversation about? Where do you see signs of? Well, that's possible. That's new. That resonates with me as a person of faith, but I wouldn't have, we were in this conversation yesterday. Some of us gathered at Playhouse on the Square to see the art that Charles Shipp, the younger, created, and we're in dialogue and in conversation with the Scottsboro Boys play. And Charles had invited the director of the play, and the two of them were then in conversation together, and it was fascinating. The art is beautiful, and the play is so creative, and it's about a really, really hard, horrific set of events. And the combination of those, of the beauty and it's a euphemism to say the difficulty. It was horror, it was terror inflicted on these young boys. And then to listen to these two men talk about how they took that story and they wanted to bring the story into the light, literally, but also in a way that people could then learn from it, grow from it, move forward, not wallow, but be inspired and be moved. And the director actually said, you won't see this or necessarily be able to name it if you see the stage production, but his faith influenced how he told the story. And because of who he is, he told the story in a certain way. So because of who we are, we can tell the stories in a certain way. This is a long, rambling segue, just to say that was not church, although there were a lot of good Calvary folk there yesterday afternoon. It was real nice. But it was, it resonated in that way of, yeah, there's some things we need to acknowledge. There's some confession and reconciliation work that we need to do. And there's also beauty and energy and delight even in this conversation. So I think holding that both of those things are possible is part of this conversation for me. So that was also my attempt to stall, to give you a chance to think of your example, of your glimpse, or your question, or your comment about this. Yeah, Mitch.
I think one of the richest things about where Lenten Preaching Series is now is the combination of these incredible speakers in our pulpit 3 days a week. That's phenomenal. But added to that is the fact that, yes, through technology, we can click a link and we can share this conversation with people for days and weeks to come and facilitate ongoing conversations. In addition to that, as we look at all that's going on here, the Wednesday nights bringing 2 and 3 of these remarkable people together from such diversified backgrounds, that, you know, what an incredible privilege for us to be able to have ongoing dialogue and to learn from 2 or 3 more on a Wednesday night. And then, and yes, here comes the plug, the additional opportunities to spend time with Becca Stevens next Saturday morning at Calvary at Holy Communion with Breakfast with Becca, to have an opportunity for an ongoing opportunity with Greg Boyle and with Padre Gautama. I mean, it's phenomenal that not only do we get to have these people in our pulpit, but on a Wednesday night and for additional hours. I mean, what incredible gifts. And yeah, I sound emotional. How lucky are we?
Thanks. Yeah.
I can totally relate to the emotion, Madge, because there's so much depth, and there's so much depth even in what you all have all talked about today and what you've all shared and what's all coming in our way. And I'll speak for myself, but I have a feeling that y'all can relate. But I'm always looking into who am I, and how can I be a better person in this world, and how can I learn how to navigate and be a positive partner and partner in this greater community of ours that I don't always understand and I don't always have the answers for. And, you know, I so appreciate the complexity, but also the simple ways that we gather together as a loving community of faith, and what that means for each of us differently. But we have the opportunity to ask these big questions and to dive deeper into these problems that we see. And we are given the opportunity to look and dive into the history and everything. Even when I think about the ways we look at the Bible and the stories in our Christianity, it's like, how do we fit into that story and what do we do with it today? And so it is such a gift that we are continually being given the opportunity, and by all of these wonderful volunteers and our staff and our clergy that keep bringing all these voices to us that will help us dive deeper into who we are and what role we play in this world.
Yeah, man.
My name is Bill Atmeyer, and I was writing notes here, so I have to admit I didn't hear everything everybody said. But I've been thinking about several things that came up here, and, you know, one of you acknowledged, you know, the history of the Episcopal Church, the history with our indigenous people that got sent to these schools, and the history of slavery, and you know, they're telling people now you can't tell this really happened, you know, because you might make these poor school kids feel guilty. And, you know, guilt is appropriate, and maybe we feel guilty. And then I've been thinking about the confession, right? You know, forgive us for the sins that things we've done and what we've left undone. And I've been really focusing on the second half. And I've said to myself, well, get off your butt and do something, right? And then that's what this place is about. A lot of people just, we're getting up, off, and doing what we can. Like, it's like the speaker yesterday said, you just have to do what you can, do what you can. So that's kind of my thoughts on this. And I guess that is is that hopeful? It's like we're moving in the right direction, I guess.
It's not despair. It's not despair. Something in all three of yours, I don't know if this connects, but I had, whether it's just doing what you can in this broader story, or there's a way in which I've always, a funeral in the Episcopal tradition is a powerful thing. The liturgy is very simple, and we have a sense that it was handed down to us and it can hold this. And so there's some new some hard pain that we're hearing, and I think it can hold this. And so we're in the midst of some really hard moments in Memphis and in our world, and how do we deal with these things? And to have Bill mention something like the confession, to say, to me, it resonates. One, it gives me a form to take up, but a handed down form in a sense that other people have wondered what are the things they've left undone too. And the power in the series being 100 years old, to think about all of what was that decade's challenge? What was that world war like? What was that depression like? And in all of that, there was both a continuity and a creativity that I think can be allowed when you have this stable community that can hold this. Even if I get my bit really, really wrong, I have a sense that I can risk doing my bit and trying it. It's not just me. Anyway, those are some themes that I feel and hear in what you're saying.
We talk a lot about community, and I know an awful lot of people are involved in a lot of different organizations, groups, and I wish we could have, this is just me speaking, maybe nobody else thinks this way, but I wish we could have people who are really involved in something to reach out and extend an invitation to somebody else in the church. I hear that people are doing certain things, but they've never, they talk about what it does for them, but they've never said, how about you come along and see what I'm experiencing and see if it's a good fit for you. So I would appreciate just more invitations from individuals that I trust and I would feel comfortable going with them. And then once I'm there, deciding if this does feel good for me, but just the reach out, personal reach out to me is important.
Anything else? Yeah.
I was just here sitting and thinking, and along came Kate, and she expressed what I had been thinking about, and I appreciate that very much. I think it would be wonderful if Calvary made a specific design, a specific way to accomplish something like she's talking about and what I'm thinking about, and we can do it if anybody can. Over the years, I have had some friends and known people, and you have too, who are so cynical, who are so down about everything, and a problem comes out. Well, what can you do about it? You can't. Homelessness, what can you do about that? So on and so forth. And I've always wished, and sometimes I just in conversation would say it, well, do you know about so-and-so? I used to have a friend, for example, who'd talk about how bad teenage pregnancy was. And I said, well, you ever heard of Claudia Haltom and A Step Ahead? There are good things going on in Memphis. I just believe that there are few cities who have as many groups, organizations, etc., trying to solve problems. Madge is nodding her head. And of course, she's part of one of those very good efforts. And Bill spoke up, and he's one of what I think is a very good effort at the mental health court. But just to help people find that, and it would not I think you'd have to think about many people in their work lives, in their careers, and when they have time and what they could do. But just say, do you really want to do something to make a difference in Memphis? Come talk to us. Maybe we can help you find that opportunity to fulfill